listening to episode 208 of Mitolife Radio. I am Matt Blackburn, your host, and today I'm interviewing Elliot Overton. Elliot is the owner of EO Nutrition, where he educates people about thiamine, vitamin B1, and its various benefits for multiple different health conditions. In this episode, he breaks down the function of thiamine in the body, who has an increased need for it, why it doesn't matter if you're supplementing other nutrients if you're deficient in vitamin B1. He shares how he uses thiamine for people that have EMF sensitivity. He shares his philosophy around supplementation in general and why it's not just soil depletion. He talks about the paradoxical effect, how your symptoms of deficiency will get worse when you start supplementing thiamine, how to supplement B1 as well as B complex, the difference in forms of all of the different B1 supplements. He talks about how thiamine affects glutamate metabolism, and then he shares his thoughts on some of the other B vitamins, including vitamin B2. And then if you're a cigar enjoyer like myself, then you'll like the back and forth that Elliot and I had about the very misunderstood plant called tobacco. So enjoy the show. Here is Elliot Overton. Okay, Elliot Overton, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Matt.
Yeah, this is going to be a really fun one. I've listened to a lot of your videos. My friend Sky actually introduced me to your supplement line, and it was, B1 therapy, and that was something I'd never heard of. People are, supplementing. There's B12 groups, there's copper groups, there's all these different groups for different nutrients, but I never heard of thiamine therapy. And so I ordered some of your products and started taking them. And I was intrigued with all of the applications that you detail in your videos for alcoholics and just people that have been stressed, and kind of the widespread deficiency of thiamine that exists possibly in most people in the developed world. So I appreciate the information that you're putting out there about B vitamins.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. When it comes to B1, it's pretty remarkable, like the amount of stuff that one vitamin can actually help. I mean, if you learn about nutrition, you learn about deficiencies, then you learn that for every different B vitamin, there's these characteristic kind of deficiency symptoms, right? So for B1, it's the patient develops very, very polyneuropathy and then severe brain damage kind of thing. And that's the end stage deficiency. With niacin or whatever, you develop pellagra, you develop these very characteristic diseases because of a deficiency. And that's really the way that medical doctors are trained, is they're trained to look for these diseases. Whereas when you actually dig into it, it seems as though a dysregulation or an impairment in the utilization of B vitamins is involved in practically every single type of disease. And you could say the same about minerals as well. I know that you've gone deep dives into lots of the other nutrients in your podcasts in the past. So you understand this more than most. And so it does seem as though nutrients, B vitamins, cofactors, minerals are really the body's main defense, main protection against disease when you're looking at it from a preventative perspective. But as it happens, they can also be used therapeutically to bring someone out of a state of disease, and again, it's understandable that modern medicine or conventional medicine being run by Big Pharma is not going to be interested in this approach, but it's remarkable how few natural health practitioners, nutritionists, alternative medicine doctors are really aware of the extent and the magnitude by which these nutrients can be used to really, really, really lift someone out of a state of metabolic imbalance or, disease. So I'm particularly interested in that whole kind of field. I think you'd probably refer to it as orthomolecular medicine or orthomollecularism. And I think that that whole thing is fascinating, you know?
Yeah, I like what you said, that doctors are trained to identify the end stage of the deficiency, whether it's B1, beriberi, or pellagra with B3, instead of spotting it, before the end stage, right? Which is when we want to catch it. Because that has implications for, preventing people getting on antidepressants and maybe epilepsy meds. I mean, we're talking kind of neurological mostly, right? When we're talking B1?
To some extent, if you look at the main ways in which it presents deficiency wise, the main three areas are going to be the nervous system. So that could be the brain or the peripheral nerves. So it could be neuropathy or whatever. It can also affect the heart, also affect the gut. But these are these are end stages of deficiency, because it turns out that like every other B vitamin, or, like the complement of nutrients, it's needed by every cell in the body, right? So when you consider that every single cell needs energy and they need a consistent source of energy, and you need B vitamins to make energy, well, theoretically, if you're low in any of the B vitamins that are needed to make energy, likewise with the minerals, then it can affect any system. It can affect every single cell of the body, and that's basically what it does. And interesting, like I've done real deep dives into B1, but I think the same applies for other nutrients as well. But when you look at the earliest study, or the earliest human study on B1, it was discovered that basically you have this collection of deficiency diseases, these like end stage. So you had this study which was done, I think it was in the 1930s or 1940s, and it was performed in the UK. And they basically got a collection of people, I think it was like 8 or 9 or 10 individuals, and they put them on a diet which only contained 10% of the amount of the B1 that they needed to, maintain health, kind of thing. So they put them on 10% of what they should be having. And they were expecting to see that those people would develop these end stage deficiency diseases like early on. So they were kind of sitting there watching intently to see how quickly these people developed those symptoms. And none of them did. So they kept the study going for a month, and then 2 months. At the 2-month mark, not one of them had developed these diseases that are associated with the deficiency. In fact, what all of them developed, they all developed symptoms and side effects, very severe symptoms and side effects, but not the classical picture of a deficiency. So examples would be, some of the first things that people developed was functional digestive disorders. This was reflux, bloating, all of the symptoms that you'd associate with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, right? So constipation, a lot of the things that you would throw lots of supplements out these days. People were developing these first of all. Then they developed very non-specific symptoms like lethargy, depression, insomnia. They'd get slightly dizzy when they stood up, or they just had chronic fatigue, or they had body pains. So it was like, you've got chronic fatigue syndrome, you've got fibromyalgia, you've got all of these kind of very non-specific symptoms, which could fit in any of these kind of modern day diseases now, all showed up before anyone developed the end stage deficiency disease. So that was a study which demonstrated, I mean, they wouldn't be able to do it these days. It would be unethical. But I'm glad that they managed to do that, because they were surprised to see that they didn't find what they were expected to see. And actually, they concluded that the way that this nutrient deficiency can affect the body is so non-specific, in that it could be going on underneath the surface, and doctors will not know how to diagnose this. And this is, I think, what you see clinically, or you see in real life, is that when someone has a subclinical or a low-level deficiency in any of these nutrients, again, just on the topic of thiamine, when they have a low-level subclinical deficiency, it's not necessarily going to show up on tests. It's not necessarily going to manifest in the way that you learn about in textbooks. It can manifest in lots of different health complaints, which people would not know to identify or associate it with a deficiency, and therefore they don't know how to treat it. And so here's where sometimes people take a leap of faith. They come across my work, they find the work of Daryl Lonsdale or something, they take a leap of faith and they try it and they see that it works and they're like over the moon. Sometimes people think it's even placebo or coincidence, when actually, like, I think most of the time it's not. Is that they were dealing with this low level underlying insufficient levels of this nutrient, and they'd never been told it before, so they tried it and it worked. So this is something that you see more often than not, and actually there's many thousands of people doing this now, and it's quite remarkable to witness. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I ordered because you mentioned testing, I ordered like a mitochondrial cheek swab test, which supposedly they're in the Northeast, they can measure your mitochondrial function of the different complexes using like just a simple cheek swab, which sounds too good to believe. But I remember in one of your videos, you were saying that thiamine is like the first step in energy production. So I wonder if that could help, because I know when we get to vitamins and testing, minerals, it's also difficult, but vitamins, especially B vitamins, vitamin C, even the fat soluble vitamins, it's kind of hard to get an accurate measure of body stores, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I don't know which lab was it that you used for that. Do you remember?
I'll try to find it. It was let's see. Religion. Yeah, it had a weird name. Religion. Let me see. I'll try to search here while we're chatting. But
yeah, well, I mean, on the topic of testing, I think there's lots of different ones that are coming out. There's some research-based tests. There's what's called the urinary organic acids test. This looks at the different metabolites. So what you're urinating out. If you've got high levels of certain metabolites, then it can tell you that there might be a blockage at a certain step of an enzyme. So enzymes in your body convert A to B, and if you've got high levels of A, then it can kind of give you an indication that maybe that enzyme isn't working, and therefore what are the cofactors used for that enzyme. And it can give you some rough idea of where any blockages in metabolism might be. There's more specialized tests which look at, like you said, the different activities of the complexes, the carnitine shuttle, etc. Mm-hmm. What I would say is that this is based on a concept, which is that, how to phrase this, when you dig into the literature, what you'll see is that most people with any kind of like a chronic disease, specifically when it comes to heart conditions or specific organ conditions, liver disease, brain disease, central nervous system problems, you'll see that when you look at the mitochondrial dysfunction is limited to that organ, right? It's not necessarily systemic. So if you look at their muscles, for instance, it might show as completely normal. But if you look in the brain, you're going to see, if someone with Alzheimer's, you're going to see that they've got massive neuroinflammation. They've got massive oxidative stress. This isn't necessarily something that's going to come up when you look at the systemic levels of metabolites elsewhere in the body. And I think the same could probably be said if you did a cheek swab. And so you often get a lot of people who say, oh, I'm not deficient in this because this test showed this. And whilst I do like the functional tests, they're generally much better most of the time than the conventional test or static test. So you can look at vitamins in blood, for instance, and in some respects that can give a rough idea of total body status. For instance, vitamin B6, plasma B6, certain minerals, it can give you a rough idea, but it doesn't tell you what's happening in the organ or tissue level. And that's what I think I'm most interested in. And this is because if you look at like a complex condition like fibromyalgia, for instance, the things that go on in the brain seem to be different to what's going on systemically. So for instance, if they look at mitochondrial function of the muscles, there's some studies which show it's impaired, other studies which show it's not impaired. But it seems to be that what is consistently present is that there's this central problem stemming from the brain. And so yeah, I don't think it's as simple as just measuring a blood sample or measuring one part of the organ. If you had a way to get into the organ that is diseased or the organ where the main problem is stemming from, then it might be more accurate. But sometimes if you look at, for instance, Parkinson's disease, it's only one region of the brain where there's a problem, substantia nigra in the surrounding structures. So actually what they found is that, okay, if you do an autopsy or you take a brain sample, you find that there's like major cellular imbalances around those areas, but in other areas of the brain, not so much. So again, it's not even like as simple as going to the organ. You have to kind of target exactly where the problem's stemming from. Now, I don't think anyone knows enough to be able to even do that. So yeah.
Yeah, it needs like some extraterrestrial technology for that one. I found the test. It's Mitoswab, and it is the company is Religion DX RELIGEN. I have no affiliation. I just found it randomly, and but yeah, that's a good point about systemic versus local and how that wouldn't apply. So we're probably a ways away from being able to scan organs and glands and parts of the brain and figure out the specific deficiency. Kind of random question. You mentioned Parkinson's. Have you ever looked into nicotine and or tobacco for Parkinson's? Looked into that therapy?
Yeah. So actually smokers have a significantly lower risk of developing Parkinson's. Smoking, funnily enough, it's not necessarily even just the nicotine component of the tobacco. So there's other components. First of all, tobacco contains monoamine oxidase inhibitors. What these do is they prevent the breakdown of certain neurotransmitters. It promotes dopamine output, and it kind of preserves dopamine in the brain. And that's one of the reasons why cognition is pretty consistently elevated in smokers compared to non-smokers. They generally tend to, if you compare someone who smokes and someone who doesn't smoke, then you'll see that the cognitive tests that they perform, smokers generally outperform non-smokers on every metric. However, if the person is deprived of a cigarette, if it's gone, 2 or 3 hours, then actually they perform worse than the non-smokers. So it does seem as though there's a variety of neuroprotective effects of tobacco, and particularly Parkinson's. And there's like several papers where the authors call it like a paradox, because you would think that something that's labeled to be so bad, although I don't think it's quite as bad as they say it is. People who say that this is terrible and everyone needs to stop. Well, actually, they say, actually, it's one of the best things that anyone with Parkinson's can do. That's to paraphrase, but statistically it is, because it's one of the most protective things against developing Parkinson's, along with other neuropsychiatric conditions such as schizophrenia. In fact, what you'll find is that the rate of schizophrenia among smokers, or the rate of people who smoke who have schizophrenia or bipolar, is really high, but smoking is protective or prevents the onset of those diseases. And so again, there's lots of really interesting relationships there. And smoking, as we know, or nicotine, is a 7-alpha nicotinic acid receptor binding agent. So it basically stimulates the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway in the vagus nerve, and that's one of the reasons why it calms people down. They say it has to do with addiction, but no, it has pharmacological effects to reduce inflammation via targeting the vagus nerve and actually improving brain function through stimulating the cholinergic system. It's very useful against something like Alzheimer's disease as well, and that's one of the reasons why nicotine has been used in research for Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. Sorry, wow. did that.
That was incredible. I never heard that vagus nerve bit. That's really fascinating. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say tobacco gets slammed all the time, and there's a difference between cigars and conventional cigarettes. There's just a huge difference in the amount of crazy compounds that are in there.
Yeah, indeed. And what I would say is I can send you some papers afterwards. I became very interested in this when looking at the vagus nerve and things, and there's actually some rather open-minded doctors who use nicotine as part of their practice to reduce inflammatory conditions or to promote kind of the vagus nerve function. And there's a couple of interesting papers. One is titled Nicotine, the anti-inflammatory molecule. And so they compile a bunch of different research which shows that nicotine in and of itself, whilst it is a plant toxin, you need to consume a lot of it for it to be toxic to humans. But ultimately, in the amount that is either gotten from nicotine gum or from something like a cigar or a cigarette, the amount of nicotine is actually, it seem to have a net anti-inflammatory effect on the human body. And again, it's very interesting when you look at the history of tobacco. Well, when they originally discovered tobacco, the Europeans, the natives were using it as medicine, right? So they used to use it for lung conditions, and they used to use it for reducing pain and a variety of different traditional uses. And the first doctors who brought it from the Americas back over to Europe, tobacco was used as a medicine, or was known as a medicine and employed by doctors for at least 100 years, until it started to become demonized. And it became demonized way before there was any science to back that up. So there were a lot of historical figures who took a disliking to smoking. Interestingly, one of those was Hitler. He despised the stuff. But ultimately, there's a very interesting history behind the use of tobacco as medicine. And I personally think that there probably are very useful medicinal uses. But the problem is that when it's sprayed with shit, when they add so much toxic chemicals and things to it, it's so far removed from what you would naturally get if you were just smoking the tobacco plant. So I think smoking natural tobacco is probably qualitatively different to smoking conventional cigarettes. I agree with you.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've been into cigars for several years now, and my protocol around it is to supplement vitamin E as mixed tocopherols and ascorbic acid, which mitigates the oxidative stress damage. And then I'll follow it usually with inhaling dry salt, so halotherapy, to kind of clear the lungs. And that's my current, it's kind of cigar mitigation protocol. And I always just swish with water during it, because smoke on the teeth and gums probably isn't a good thing. So I'm just very aware of oral health. But yeah, that was all really great info. And I got interested in it because of the anti-parasitic properties, like the old Farmer's Almanac. They would talk about giving it to pigs and how it was a really powerful dewormer for swine. And when you search tobacco parasites, you'll see all these clinical studies pop up. And so that was, back in my raw vegan days, was just cleanse. That was my goal, to get rid of every last worm in the body. And so tobacco was a part of that.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know about nicotine itself is it's one of the tools by which the plant uses to protect itself against pests, right? So it makes sense that it does have these antimicrobial properties. One interesting thing, just a little tidbit, is that when I was digging into this concept of, some medicinal benefits or effects of nicotine tobacco, there's a couple of papers looking at the supercentenarians of the world. So you've got the people who live to 115, 120, 125 plus years old, and the remarkable consistency. There's people who will say, blue zones and diet and blah 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 blah. There is remarkably consistent levels of smoking among that population. In fact, the vast majority, like 80 or 90% of supercentenarians, last time I looked anyway, it's a couple of years ago, were all heavy smokers. And he's like, that doesn't necessarily jive with the research and the kind of conventional message that this is the main killer. I personally wonder whether it has been either it's having some kind of their resilience against it, or they're able to utilize the benefits and mitigate the dangers. These specific types of people, we know that smoking does improve NAD, increases the NAD to NADH ratio, activates sirtuins, and they are associated with longevity. So it does seem as though there may be some people who may be able to take the benefits and be more protected against the detriments of it. Or I wonder whether at some point smoking has kind of become a scapegoat for other environmental poisons and toxins, which, if you look at statistically, the increases in lung cancer tend to correlate much better with industrial pollutants, with household, fresheners and cleaning products and things like that. rather than smoking. And in fact, if you look at like lung cancer rates by smoking, well, many of the countries who have the highest rates of smoking have some of the lowest rates of lung cancer. You look at, for instance, Hong Kong, I think it's, or Japan, or some of the other countries where Hungary might be another example, if I remember correctly. And so it seems as though it's not very well understood. And I think it's an oversimplification to say that the main cause of lung cancer is smoking, or, they blame a lot of things on alcohol as well. Whereas I think that probably the man-made industrial pollutants and man-made chemical toxins probably play a much more significant role in that. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that was probably gone off on a tangent there, but I just find it a fascinating topic.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, so I don't have to name this episode "The Benefits of Nicotine and Tobacco." We better move on to, I'll connect this to B1. So I like to think of nutrients often in terms of like burn rate based on someone's diet or lifestyle or whatever. And I mentioned vitamin C and vitamin E with smoking. Does that apply to B1? Do you know if smokers use up their B1 more since they're activating all these pathways? And
it does seem that way. Yeah, it seems as though nicotine has a direct impact on thiamine, so it can inactivate the uptake of B1 into certain cells, the pancreas being one of them, but other cells as well. Likewise, similar effect on biotin. It's known to deplete biotin. I think it's in the mouth or in the gingiva. So smoking tends to have a depleting effect, not only on the antioxidant system, like you mentioned, but also on the B vitamins as well. Like I said, B1, biotin, probably all of them, I would imagine, because if it's increasing metabolism, which it does seem to have an effect to do, then you are going to have an enhanced turnover, but it can also enhance affect the uptake of nutrients into the cells and things. I would have to look into that in more detail. But yeah, it's just one of many things which tends to tank B1. Another one being coffee. Coffee basically inactivates B1 in the gut. So if you have someone who's drinking a lot of coffee around their meals, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to make them deficient. But that said, it can be a trigger in someone who's skirting on the edge, skirting at this subclinical level. And if they drink multiple cups of coffee with every single meal, then that's going to significantly impact the amount of B1 that they're going to be absorbing through the gut. Now, one thing that I would say is that if you take ascorbic acid with coffee, then that can inactivate the tannins, which inactivate the thiamine. So basically ascorbic acid, a little bit of vitamin C, if you're concerned about that long term, that can be a kind of protective mechanism to prevent the negative effect on BL.
I tried that. I took my vitamin C product with coffee, and it was too much acid or something. It felt like a bomb going off in my gut. And so I only did that once, but maybe I took too much. I don't know. I think I took like a gram or something. So,
right. Yeah. I don't think you'd need that much. I think probably in the realm of like 100 or 200 milligrams would probably suffice for that purpose.
Mm-hmm. And alcohol as well, right? Even if someone's, just one glass of wine here and there or whatever, that affects B1 and all the B vitamins.
Yeah, indeed. Alcohol is like one of the main triggers, right? So for instance, it's acting on multiple levels in the gut, in the cell. So what it does is it prevents the uptake of B1 and other B vitamins, but primarily B1. That's going to be the main issue for anyone who drinks a lot of alcohol, who's alcoholism or whatever. Basically, it prevents the uptake of B1 in the gut. And then when you get B1 into the cells, thing is you have to activate it for it to be able to be useful in our biochemistry. So basically, you run it through an enzyme called thiamine pyrophosphorus, and alcohol inhibits that step as well. So even if the B1 that is in your cells, alcohol can then basically prevent you from activating that. Now, one episode of drinking or drinking every couple of days or whatever is probably not going to have that much of a significant effect. That said, in someone who's an alcoholic, this is a primary concern, like major concern. And those people tend to be the most affected. In fact, medical doctors, they would usually learn that if you want to look out for someone with a B1 deficiency, you would look at an alcoholic. That said, if you have a collection of factors, right? You're a smoker, you drink tons of coffee, you drink multiple glasses of alcohol every day, or even one or two with your meals. Okay. It's like there immediately you've got three things which have like a detrimental impact on B1 status. And then if you add on top of that, you've got a diet which is rich in refined carbohydrates. And then on top of that, you've also got some kind of a digestive or an inflammatory condition. It's like all of that together is a recipe for disaster. And the primary nutrient which is going to be affected by that is B1. The reason refined carbohydrates are going to increase your requirement for B1 is basically B1 is really central to how cells use glucose for energy. And glucose being one of the primary sources, even if you're on a ketogenic diet, you still need to make glucose. You still need to use glucose. At the same time, you still need to burn fat. So B1, like the other B vitamins, is located in cells. It allows us, or it participates in how we break down food into its constituent molecules, glucose, fat, protein. And what we basically need to do is run that through several different steps, cleave it apart and break it down into smaller bits. Now, that you're doing that through enzymes, and each of those enzymes uses a nutritional cofactor, and that can be a combination of like B1, B2, B3, a couple of the minerals, for instance, and each different step requires something slightly different. So you need all of the B vitamins, you need all of the minerals to a large extent to be able to successfully generate energy from food. But at different steps, this is where things get a little bit more complicated, because you mentioned prior, there's this concept that B1 is like sits at the gateway to energy metabolism. This the way that Lonsdale and Dr. Chandler Mars describe it. And I think it's an accurate statement. The reason is because the enzymes which require B1 to work, some of those are referred to as rate limiting. What that basically means is that when they stop working, then the entry of or the generation of energy by the cells slows down. Okay. It's like it limits, a rate limiting factor is that it basically slows down everything else after that point. So if you don't have enough B1, it doesn't necessarily matter if you have enough niacin, if you have enough B2, if you have enough of any of the other complement of nutrients which you need to make energy. If you don't have enough B1, you're going to have problems. Okay. And that's why I think it plays such an important role in so many different chronic diseases, and why it can go quite overlooked, because, here's the thing, every single cell requires energy. Every single organ does. And if you look at the more recent direction of scientific research, is looking at mitochondrial function, or essentially bioenergetics. So how well cells maintain energy status. That seems to be an important factor in practically every known disease. Okay. So therefore, one of the priorities in not only preventing things like aging, but also in preventing and treating disease is to make sure that mitochondrial function working well, so that cells can have energy to do the stuff that they need to do, right? And so if we look at B1 being the rate limiting step in that process, it's like, okay, that puts it pretty much at center stage for a lot of these conditions which involve mitochondrial dysfunction, right? So you look at something like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, MS, neurological conditions, practically all of these collection of diseases. If there is some degree of mitochondrial dysfunction, then B1 has great potential to help with that. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I used to be pretty deep in the quantum health community, and I don't know if you've looked into it, but it's kind of become popular recently with the liver guy. But it's basically getting sun in your eyes first thing in the morning, grounding, getting in cold water, and these are all things that improve mitochondrial function, by increasing your circadian rhythm, balance, and all that stuff. So some people say, supplements and nutrition is not going to fix these broken engines if you don't, give it the light stimulus at the right time and no light at night. And do you kind of agree with that philosophy, or?
No, I think it's an oversimplification. Yeah. I went down that track. I was a follower of Jack Kruse back in like 2014 when he was first writing like the ubiquination series or whatever. Like I was big into that, and I think it definitely is important. But to say that light is more important than food, is just practically like in real. You see, like I've worked with people for years, right? Like upwards of 1,000 people. And it would be great if that stuff worked practically. And whilst it does work, it helps people. Mm-hmm. I feel as though Jack Kruse, in the type of personality he has, I think he's a great brain. He has an amazing brain, but he's a very strong character, right? And when he makes a statement as though it's fact, people tend to believe it. And I think sometimes he says things for shock value. And that's a thing that builds followers, right? And we see that he's built a very large following. But what you notice is that people will go to his work hoping that they'll find answers. And many of them actually drift off and go elsewhere because they try the whole, quantum health stuff because they grow to believe that that's going to be the solution to all of their problems. They fix the circadian rhythm. They do light, water, magnetism, whatever they say. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, for many people, it doesn't actually fix the problem. And it's like, I think it's really important to get all of that stuff down, but to downplay the significance of nutrients, it's blindsided. And I think it's also demonstrative of someone who hasn't really much experience using these in clinical practice, because, I saw a bunch of people who would come to me from that community, come to me from the light, water, magnetism stuff, figure out that actually, okay, this helped me in certain ways. I'm sleeping better. My energy slightly improved, but I still got this health problem. I follow this diet and I do this. And I'm like, okay, let's look at how we can dig in and actually see what's going on. Try to get an estimate of what's going on at the cell level. You seem to have a problem handling some kind of a nutrient. Now, the simple solution from what I can see from that community, and this is one of the reasons why I tended to drift away from that several years ago, was that you're not doing it right. You're in an EMF lit environment, and therefore you need to go and move to Mexico and basically live out in the woods. And it's like, or in the jungle or whatever it is, I don't know. And for some people that might work. And if you can do that, that's amazing. But the vast majority of people do not have the resources to do that. And I would rather figure out how to adapt to EMF if possible. Try to mitigate as much as possible, try to avoid it, but find ways to provide the body with protection or enhance protection against that. Because I think that's possible as well. We've got to find a way to adapt to this stuff in some way. Not everyone can just, pick up and leave. Some people have to live in cities. You've got to be practical about it. So how can we try our best to protect against those things? And nutrients is how we do that, right? This is how the body protects itself against any kind of stressor. Whether that's an infection, whether that's EMF, I literally just posted a video on this like last week, basically titled, should you take supplements? Because there's so many people who say, oh, if you do this stuff with the light, water, magnetism, or if you do the carnivore diet, oh yeah, just get yourself on a carnivore diet. You don't need any supplements. It's like, that is such an oversimplification. If you look at, even if the diet that you're eating does provide enough nutrition, enough nutrients to hit all of the RDAs, that doesn't necessarily tell us about your requirement, because your requirement for whatever reason could be way higher than someone else's. Now there's genetics to factor in, but there's also these collection of environmental stresses which most of us are exposed to. And the point, or the kind of argument I run with in that environment, which I'm fairly convinced is true, is that what worked for us 10,000 years ago, the amount of nutrition that we needed is probably not enough today. And the fundamental reason for that is because most of the bad stuff that we come into contact with in our modern world actively depletes us of nutrition. And that's not just through inhibiting the absorption, or it's not just through soil depletion of nutrients. It's because the way, like the fundamentals of how the body deals with any kind of stressor, and that could be toxin, like I said, infection, it could be an injury, it could be a chemical toxin, a heavy metal, a radiation poisoning, radiation toxin, all of these different things. The body reacts in quite a similar way to all of them. And what it does is it uses nutrients to build things. It builds enzymes, builds proteins, builds response elements, all of these different things, not only to actively protect or to counteract the damage of the poison, but also then to get the poison out of the body as well. So it's like at every single step of the way, the body will increase the rate at which it uses nutrients. nutrients are therefore the body, or the way that the body protects against this stuff. And therefore the demand goes up. And that is why I'm not convinced, or why I am convinced rather, that one can use nutrients in a higher dose than normal to help provide the body protection against some of the bad stuff. I'm convinced of it. I really think it's true.
That was awesome. Yeah, that soil depletion meme is so popular, and people just look no further than that meme, say, okay, that's, it's been overblown. They're saying the soil's depleted. What if it's not? I'm just going to eat carnivore. And, they're just selling supplements, which you and I sell supplements. And so I think that creates a complication, because it makes people harder to trust what we're saying. So, oh, you have a vested interest. But what I often tell people, you don't have to buy ascorbic acid from me. I put polyphenols with it, whatever. You could buy that anywhere. I don't care. It's just, here's what this nutrient does. You can get it wherever you want. It's like,
yeah. And what, I mean, I don't know about yourself, but the ironic thing is that like people will accuse me of basically focusing on B1 because I own a company that makes B1 and makes a specific type of B1. The thing is, I was talking about B1 for years, like for years before I made the company. In fact, the only reason I made the company was to basically provide a product that wasn't there before. There's this like it was very difficult to source in the UK. Okay. So I was trying to get clients to get it from America, and that was really difficult. So I actually looked at like stocking of the brand and that kind of thing. I eventually came to the decision that, okay, this is actually way easier just to make a company and start making it myself, and there were other reasons as well. But like, I think what some people find difficult to understand is that people like you or me might get into the business because we think that it works, because we've seen benefit ourselves or whatever, not just to make money, like, of course, a man's got to make a living, but does that mean that he can't do something which is, in truth, and like, try and actually provide a service that is useful? That's what the idea is,
Right.
At least
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Going back to what you said too about the EMFs, I love that we should be providing the body with protection, which is usually in the form of these nutrients. Have you looked into Doris Lowe's work on like vitamin C and melatonin for, living in a 5G world, as she calls it, like EMF protection? Because her philosophy is basically we can't escape it. You can go to these EMF dead zones in the Mexican cenotes or wherever, but 99% of your life, you are going to be in this unnatural radiation. And so that increases our ascorbate needs, requirements, and it suppresses melatonin production, even if you're wearing blue blockers. So her work was really fascinating to me.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. I think she is, I think she's done excellent deep dive into both of those nutrients. I'm in complete agreement with her. I was in agreement with her before she wrote that stuff, right? I mean, she was part of the whole Jack Kruse community many years ago, like practically from the start. I remember her from back on the Jack Kruse forum, right? So she's been digging into this stuff, and I think that her philosophy is clever. We have to be wise, because we can't, even if you think that you're getting away from this stuff, I think it's probably impossible. So why not try to use the tools that we've got at our disposal? And it seems as though, if you look at the biochemistry, the evidence, not only is it vitamin C, of course, vitamin C can help at every other step of the kind of the endogenous antioxidant system, right? In that it can help to recycle a lot of the other nutrients. But ultimately, if you look at the studies, it would seem as though our demand, or the rate at which we're destroying things like vitamin E, could also be the omega-3 fatty acids in our brain. That could be a very good argument to say that, okay, well, whilst omega-3 may not be good in large doses for long periods of time, in fact, if you're destroying what's already in your brain because of this kind of like resident or low-level EMF environment and low-level chronic oxidative stress, maybe it is a good idea to replace those. You know, again, the same could be said for lots of different nutrients. I've got an article up on my website about using thiamine to protect against EMF. In fact, I use it quite frequently in people who have what's known as EMF sensitivity. You know, people who not only, I think these people are somewhat lucky because their threshold is lowered. They know when they're around it, when they know when they're around dangerous levels. Most people don't. So it's like the invisible killer for many of us. But ultimately, the people who have EMF sensitivity, they get all of these symptoms. Well, there's very specific things that you can do in terms of supplements, and melatonin is one of those. Thiamine is another. Selenium is another. A bunch of other things, vitamin C, vitamin E. There's a variety of different nutrients which you can use to actually these people can notice, they notice immediate effects from using supplements. And these can be people who are on the best diet that you can think of, right? They're on super clean living. They try their best to get out of these environments and things. But whenever they go back into the city, they notice buzzing in their head. They notice pain. They notice like neuropathy and things. When they take the supplements, they don't get it. So it's like, that tells you something, you know, you see that enough times and you start saying, well, okay, maybe this stuff can actually provide genuine protection against the shit that we're doing in our modern world. You know?
Yeah,
so, yeah,
that's great. Yeah, I took it to the extreme. I built, and I'm seriously considering tearing it down. I built like a Faraday cage room with a sensory deprivation float chamber in there, and I'd put like 2 coats of the Y Shield. It's like graphite paint, the black paint that blocks EMF down to a crazy, pretty strong decibel range. And I always felt anxious going in there. Like I never had like a peaceful experience in that room. So I'm kind of questioning the whole blocking Faraday idea, because you're blocking the Earth's magnetic field as well, which we know has harm. So it's a really complicated subject. That's kind of why I enjoy it. I mean, it's so nuanced. There's so many aspects to it.
Yeah, and not much is known about it as well. I mean, it doesn't help that the vast majority of conventional doctors and researchers will say that there is no effect of non-ionizing radiation, right? So that's an uphill battle in and of itself, and you've only got a couple of mavericks who actually speak openly about it. But that said, I think a similar concept applies. When you look at the effects it's having at the cellular level, it acts like many other types of stressors, and therefore you can use similar principles. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that there aren't like quantum effects. I don't really like to use that word because I'm not a quantum physicist. I don't really know what it means. I think it gets like thrown around a little bit too often. But that said, maybe it does have an effect on like interfacial water. Maybe it does have effect on like quantum tunneling or whatever Jack Kruse talks about. I don't know, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to mitigate it at least. And I think that applies in most cases, even if someone following a super rich diet, you know, they're eating organs, they're eating lots of animal foods, and that's going to differ from person to person. But say someone is on a really good diet, if they have exposure to these kind of chemicals and toxins, and they are not in a perfect state of health, then I'm going to generally be recommending supplements. And like, it's even if we weren't being exposed to a lot of the model influences that we are today, just the disease process itself depletes our nutrition. Okay. So you look at inflammation, for instance, if you have chronic inflammation, there's a couple of nutrients which immediately get tanked and they stay low. One of those is selenium. Selenium is like one of the hardest hit in inflammatory conditions. You end up turning over loads of it. B6, there's a paper titled tissue specific depletion of B6. So for instance, you wouldn't necessarily be able to measure this, but wherever you have tissue inflammation in those cells, you have a depletion of the active form of B6, and that ultimately takes longer to replenish. And what you're getting through the diet may not be enough to address that. Vitamin C, again, without going into like so much detail on that, which if you've spoken about Doris Lowe, then your listeners will be familiar with it. But ultimately, vitamin C, again, is one of the first things to go in any kind of chronic inflammatory condition that features oxidative stress. And so it's like these things, the disease process itself, if someone's in a place of sickness, coupled with the fact that we're in a modern toxic world, it makes sense to use the right supplements to try to protect against that. That's my philosophy.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a generalization to say that most people on Earth have chronic inflammation from various different things. I mean, in different parts of the body. I had a question for you, Elliot, about like plant-based. I was vegan, vegetarian for 2/3 of my life, and I know B vitamins are really concentrated in animal foods, and animal products. I know like red meat and dairy. Have you worked with like former vegans or vegetarians that created pretty severe B deficiencies? And I know there's levels to it. Like I was raw vegan, which is kind of the most extreme.
Yeah, generally it's going to be some more than others. Okay, if you look, animal foods generally provide the greatest source of B vitamins of any other food. Right, so you just go onto Nutritics or Chronometer or something, and you look at the amount of Bs compared to any kind of plant. That said, if you are a vegan, you're plant-based, and you're consuming nutritional yeast, that is a pretty excellent source of the B vitamins. Not everyone does that. I would personally do that. In terms of the vitamin deficiencies in plant-based eaters, well, I was vegetarian from the age of about 4 years old until I was 18. So that was like my prime years where I'm meant to be like developing and growing and things. I was plant-based at that point. Fortunately, I was still eating cheese, but ultimately the main nutritional deficiency, or the most common, is going to be B12. And that can be remarkably difficult to treat, actually. If someone goes vegan, they develop a central nervous system B12 deficiency, an intracellular B12 deficiency. And even if they resume eating meat again, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to fix that. And so for those people, they're probably, in many cases, they require injections, or they require consistently high doses of B12 in some kind of a sublingual form, or something like that, to get into the body, to get into the brain. You can also use topical B12 for those people. But really, B vitamins across the board. For those, perhaps thiamine is less commonly low. Biotin, riboflavin, and B12 are going to be probably the most common. Vegetarians, plant-based, will be getting enough folate because if they're eating lots of legumes, or they're eating leafy vegetables and things. But really, to utilize folate, you also require B12. So they can develop the symptoms of systemic deficiencies, even if they have optimal levels in some of them and not others. And that's really the way that B vitamins work, is that because of the multiple interactions between how they're working together, is that if you're low in one, then it can mimic the signs of a deficiency in another one, or it can affect your ability to utilize another one. So yeah, that's a real problem. I don't personally work with them, and from the time that I started practicing, after about 6 months, I eventually just closed the doors to vegans and vegetarians and says, look, I'm sorry, I'm not working with anyone who is not willing to eat animals. You're going to have to find another practitioner. So it's been several years since I've actually even interacted with anyone on a plant-based diet. So I might not be the best person to ask about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. Have you looked into methylmalonic acid? Because I tried to go down that rabbit hole and just gave up because it was I couldn't figure it out. But I got a uMMA test, and for people that don't know, that's like a status tissue status marker of B12. And I was fairly low. And then I found someone's work, and they recommended lithium orotate, which I had supplemented in the past. And so I started pulsing that in significant doses. I mean, not over 100 milligrams a day, but I don't know, maybe 40 to 60 milligrams a day. And I thought I felt better. But then I got an HTMA test. My lithium was super high, so I stopped that. So have you looked into it, and what are your thoughts on that as it relates to B12?
Yeah, methylmalonic acid, right. So yeah, it's basically a metabolite that you urinate out. And the concept is that basically methylmalonic acid will build up if you don't have enough adenosylcobalamin. That's a type of B12. So it's a functional marker of your adenosylcobalamin status, because as adenosylcobalamin is the cofactor for the enzyme which metabolizes methylmalonic acid. So the idea is if you have high levels in the urine, like, if you have high levels, then it can indicate a functional B12 deficiency. It's likewise other nutrients as well. This is how you can get a rough idea of vitamin B12 status. And yeah, it's a pretty good functional marker. And that is something that you often see low in vegans or vegetarians, or anyone who has this functional B12 deficiency, whereas oftentimes their blood levels will be normal. Okay. So the concept behind lithium is that lithium is going to enhance the transport of B12 into the cell. Okay. And that is theoretically going to be one of the ways in which you can help to overcome a B12 deficiency. However, the being on a plant-based diet is basically synonymous with a B12 deficiency. So no matter how much lithium that you take, if you don't have enough usable B12 in the form of adenosylcobalamin, then you might just end up pumping up your lithium levels if you're not eating animal products. Supplements might be able to help, although I'm not too sure whether supplements are qualitatively as good as B12 in food. I think they're oftentimes necessary, but long term, I think it's much better that someone's consuming it through the diet, because there's lots of different potential things that we don't understand yet that's going on in food, whether you look at, cofactors or peptides or nutritional interactions and synergisms that allow the body to utilize it in a better way than what you would get from food anyway. So, I think it's an absolute necessity for anyone who is on a plant-based diet. That this is where those tests can also come in handy, is that if someone has any kind of health problem, looking at the functional markers on an organic acids test can help to pinpoint those underlying imbalances to some extent at least.
Yeah, the plant-based diet sounds pretty complicated with that, having to think about all this stuff. So
how long were you doing it?
It was, when did I start? I was vegetarian for 9 years, and then I went vegan, pretty much raw vegan overnight, and started green vegetable juicing and doing the whole sprouting thing and coconut almond yogurt. And I went pretty wild with it. And then went back and forth, maybe about 5 times over the next, 5 or 6 years. I did a pretty crazy experiment where I fasted for 23 hours a day. And then for my eating window, 1 hour, I would eat tofu and beans and like nutritional yeast and like a huge protein shake. And wow. I looked great, but my organ glands probably were not great. So stopped that experiment. And yeah.
How did you feel?
I felt, well, it was kind of confounded by my living environment, because I was in a really stressful place with like a stressful roommate that was kind of a toxic person. So I think, I felt bad, but I can't say whether it was my living environment, super stressful, being woken up in the middle of the night and just random stuff, or, the experiment. But yeah, I feel, better eating animal products, and I'm generally doing the steak a day still. I mean, I could only go a day without a steak, and then I'm craving one. So.
Sorry, when did you start eating animal products again? How long ago was that? It was probably around 2013, but I just went back and forth so many times. Right. So I'm 35 years old, but yeah, I remember I didn't like meat that much growing up. And so most of the meat I ate was like chicken, fish. I really didn't like beef growing up. So I can say most of my life I was like pretty much plant-based. It's just scary thinking about it, because looking into supplements over the years, I'm trying to figure out what I wasn't getting, and I'm finding it was probably a lot of stuff. Selenium, like you mentioned, vitamin E. I mean, pretty much everything. So yeah, it's really dangerous the way that things are going. It seems as though there's a concerted effort to reduce the consumption of meat, and it makes you wonder why. And looking back, I mean, I remember how I used to function as a vegetarian. And I tell you, like the mood swings, the hangriness, the brain fog, like when I started eating meat, I basically I went from, 14 years of being vegetarian to almost keto, like overnight. I was like, started reading about the keto diet. And this was like back in, when was it? 2012, 2013, when 2013. Yeah, when I switched from vegetarianism. And yeah, yeah. It took a couple of months of getting used to it, but the change in my emotional state and my ability to actually control my emotions and not flip out at every small different thing and actually deal with adversity, it was quite remarkable. And I feel as though I was probably just malnourished, and I'd always been quite thin, but I think malnourished at the brain level really, really affects your ability to think, to conceptualize, to form opinions and logical conclusions, come to a logical conclusion, rationally analyze things. And it's just quite interesting and almost coincidental that there's certain powers that be that would like to have everyone eating bugs and tofu. And that's the way that it's being pushed, and maybe we won't even have any option come a few years. So it's certainly animal foods for the win.
Yeah, that's why I did the fully off grid thing here in Idaho, just to have kind of a backup plan. And it's a whole lot of work. I mean, you can't do it alone. I think that's the fantasy that a lot of people have, is you really need neighbors or some kind of community, even if it's one or two other families at least, to make it work, because it's impossible. You would need to have like 20 kids to to keep up with everything and maintain, if you really want milk and cheese and eggs and a garden and meat. I mean, that's like a whole operation. So right now I'm just kind of changing my focus to growing fruit and vegetables here, because I would miss that if you couldn't go to the grocery store anymore. You wouldn't have anything to dress up your venison, or eggs get boring pretty quick.
Yeah.
But I try to stay optimistic. I mean, I think the artificial intelligence, I was against it for a while, but now I'm kind of for it, because it's a wild card that it can go either way, and I think either way will be good. It's better than the slave, eat bugs, Klaus Schwab path. I don't know. So I wanted to get into, how to supplement not only thiamine, but just B complex. So I can just share my experience taking your supplements, and I'm probably not a good example because I'm a megadoser, but I don't do it forever. So I like to feel something when I take it. And so, serving size is 1, let me just try 6 for, a couple weeks, not months, not a year. But I did that with cod liver oil, and it was a profound experience. I think I did treat a pretty severe retinol deficiency. And according to my genetics, I have an increased need for vitamin A. And I really felt that at a mental level, at a metabolic level. I was less cold. But with your supplements, with I think Thiamax and non-methylated B complex,
mm-hmm.
and according to my genetics, I do better with the non-methyl form. So I was happy to see that. I've been basically just keeping in mind that they're water-soluble vitamins. I think this is where a lot of people go wrong. And so they generally, and I used to do this, just take vitamin C once a day, or a B vitamin in the morning once a day. And that's not going to have as much of a benefit as like spreading it out like 3 or 4 times throughout the day. Right. So with yours, I was basically taking yours and my vitamin C like every 1 to 2 hours, basically throughout the day, if I remembered. And I felt great. And in fact, today before the interview, I took 400 milligrams of your Thiamax. So I took 4 capsules.
That's hardcore, man. That's hardcore. You don't mess around, do you? No, the fact that you can tolerate that and stuff, that demonstrates that you're probably in sounds like you're in a good kind of metabolic state. Let's say you're in a good state of kind of flexibility, because what you find is that a lot of people who are particularly ill, they would never be able to do that. Is it not necessarily the B complex or the complex, the concept of spreading it out, but the concept of taking so much, just from starting from nothing and then taking 400 milligrams out of nowhere, it would be debilitating for them. And so that's a good sign, I would say. The fact that you can do that and you can just be like, yeah, it feels good. Like I could do that as well. And that's kind of what you're looking for. When it comes to taking nutrients, what was your question again?
Well, just kind
I lost you there. You threw me off. The 6 caps a day.
Just kind of the philosophy, like how to, I guess it'd be situational, right? If someone's trying to fix a deficiency versus someone like us just looking to optimize, maybe get a nootropic effect. Mm-hmm. I guess those are like the main 2 scenarios.
Okay. So yeah, in terms of taking nutrients, what you generally find, particularly with the B vitamins, is that when someone is in a state of deficiency, then taking the RDA, or the recommended daily allowance, is not going to be enough to address that. Usually, and this is basically across the board with most nutrients, you're going to need a consistently higher amount for at least a month or 2 months. Now, when it comes to B1, that's up to a year. Okay. So you're looking at what's referred to as a megadose, or a dose which is at least 10 or 100 times what you would be getting for food. That is like the minimum. Now, in terms of, I specialize in thiamine, so I can say a lot about that. With the other B vitamins, it's that general principle. And again, I think taking it spread out portions throughout the day, that does seem to help many people, because there are limits on how much you can absorb at once with certain B vitamins and things. So I think in most cases, that's probably advisable. That's probably a useful thing to do. What I would say is that when you're using vitamins from a clinical standpoint, from a practical standpoint, it really is going to depend on what you're using it for. So if you're using it to treat a deficiency, then in any kind of situation, what I would say is that if someone has the signs and symptoms of a deficiency, they need to probably start very low and go slow and gradually build up. And that's because, particularly with B1, but it seems to be the other case with some of the other nutrients, is that when someone is low, then taking what they need, supplementing with B1, it can trigger what's called the paradoxical reaction, or the paradoxical effect. This is basically where they get worse before they get better. So someone's symptoms of deficiency will get worse, and this is why it's referred to as the paradox, because it theoretically it should make them better. You give them something the body needs, it should make them better, but it doesn't. It makes them worse. And so the concept is that someone starts very low, very, very slowly. They might start 5, 10, 15, 20 milligrams, 50 milligrams maximum, and gradually build that up over time. Allow the body to start adapting and kind of adapting to this new amount of the nutrient that's coming in. And generally after 2 to 3 months, a lot of the symptoms should have disappeared, although it can take someone, if it's very severe, can take someone 6 months to 1 year to address that. However, here's the interesting thing, and this is what I'm probably most interested in, is that when, if you look at any of my work on megadosing B1 and using thiamine therapeutically, I think most of the time it's not actually addressing a deficiency. And there's a couple of reasons for that. But I think, or I know that there are some people who don't have a diagnosable deficiency. They eat enough through their diet. They have done for many years. They don't have any signs of deficiency on blood testing or functional testing, so urinary organic acids testing, yet they respond only to remarkably high doses. So you can give them a supplement which contains 400, 500, 600 milligrams, does nothing. But when you give them something like 1,500 or 2,000 milligrams, which is 2 grams, which is 2,000 the RDA of what you would get from food, 2,000 times, only then do they see almost overnight reversal of their symptoms. Okay, so what we're dealing with there is we're dealing with probably what I refer to as a functional deficiency. And what I mean by that, or let's say a functional dependence. Okay. So a classical nutritional deficiency is different. It can be caused by someone's diet, which is low, or if they consume alcohol, or if they consume something which prevents their body from absorbing it, or they are in a state of ill health. They say they have an infection, or they have surgery, or they have like an increased demand, and so they run through their stores. So in that concept, in that state, all you need to do is give the body enough to replenish those stores. And when you replenish those stores, it can take a month or 2 months, but then things tend to normalize, then people would stop using it. When we look at using B1, and I think B1's quite unique in this regard, when you use B1 for a condition like Parkinson's disease, or for a condition like multiple sclerosis, or chronic fatigue syndrome, or fibromyalgia, you're not looking to replenish levels because the levels were never low in the first place. The problem comes with the handling or the utilization of B1 at the cellular level. So they've got enough in the body. Problem is they either can't get it into the cells, or they can't use it in the cells, or there's enough in the cells, but the processes which use B1, so the enzymes, are not working correctly. Okay, they're either slowed down, they're inactivated, or something like that. So if we go back an hour, and remember we were talking about how certain enzymes involved in energy generation are B1 dependent, and those enzymes are rate limiting. So one being pyruvate dehydrogenase, another one being alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. So if you're deficient in B1, then those will slow down and you can't make enough energy. But there's also other things which block or inactivate those enzymes. Heavy metals, for instance. Neurotoxins. In Parkinson's, they're known to generate these dopamine radicals or neurotoxins, which basically float around the cell and they dock onto enzymes and they stop them from working. And in that case, the person has enough of a B vitamin, they have enough of the cofactor, but because the enzyme has been blocked, then the cells can't make energy. So it produces the equivalent of a deficiency at the cell level. Do you follow what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. And I know you sell a supplement with cofactors, and there's magnesium, and there's another main one that you talk about. And I've been a cheerleader for magnesium for years, but I know that it does affect heavy metals. It could be, I don't know if a chelator is the right word, but it displaces metals. And so maybe magnesium is one of those things that could show as a B1 deficiency. Is that accurate? Or
in some cases, for instance, you have nutritional interactions, right? So you have basically, when you take one nutrient, you can enhance the demand for other nutrients. So magnesium and B1, they go hand in hand. Everything that B1 needs to do, magnesium also needs to do. Whenever you use B1, you also use magnesium. So just by taking magnesium by itself, that can unmask a B1 deficiency in someone. If they respond very negatively to magnesium, sometimes you find that people get very anxious. They get like rapid heart rate, they get dizziness, and they get headache, or they get fatigue when they take magnesium. That can be unmasking an underlying B1 problem. Likewise, if someone takes B1, then usually if it triggers a sympathetic nervous system, or some of the negative symptoms that they develop from taking B1 can be mitigated with magnesium. So it's super important. Generally, if you're going to do high doses of one nutrient, you generally want to do all of the B vitamins together, not all in high doses, but you want to take like a general B complex and probably like a mineral complex behind it. And that's because you often find if someone just uses the one isolated B vitamin, it can cause deficiencies or imbalances, reveal imbalances in the other ones. So really, you want to make sure that you're getting kind of surpassing the RDA in all of them. That's a general rule when you're doing any kind of high dose nutrient supplementation. But when it comes to what I mean is basically when you've got like chemicals, you've got neurotoxins, you've got things like these. What they do is they suppress energy metabolism. Okay, and when that happens, the amount of nutrient that you get through the diet is not enough to stimulate energy metabolism. So you end up with a less energy output and mitochondrial dysfunction. So the basic concept is that if you look at like genetic diseases which have this kind of problem. So for some people, they have a genetic predisposition where their enzymes have low affinity or low binding capacity for the cofactors, so for the B vitamin or whatever. And, you know, there's one called vitamin B12 responsive methylmalonic acidemia. What that is when someone it's measured by looking urine samples of usually showing in an infant. If they're peeing out lots of methylmalonic acid, then it means that the amount of B12 that they get through the diet is not enough. And oftentimes the only way to preserve this child's life is by giving them pharmacological doses of B12 every day. And if they don't have enough B12, if you don't supplement with B12, they're going to die fairly early on, most of the time. And so the concept is that the giving a low amount is not enough, but giving a super high amount can saturate the cell. And when you saturate the cell, you can overcome that inactivation for whatever reason. Similar concept of using B1. And that's one of the reasons why some people, they don't benefit from taking a very low dose. They don't benefit from even taking 500 to 1000 milligrams. They see no difference. But then when they reach the 1,500 or 2,000 milligram, it's almost like an overnight, because what you're doing is just saturating the cells with massive amounts, and it seems to restart the way that cells are generating energy. And this was demonstrated in Parkinson's. There's an Italian doctor named Dr. Antonio Costantini. He did several trials. He did trials on Parkinson's, and what they showed was that he could, in a large portion of the patients, they could achieve practically or almost symptomatic remission. So Parkinson's being a condition which has supposedly no cure, they found that they could almost reverse all of the symptoms of Parkinson's in most of the people just through using megadoses of B1. And based on these results, he did a much larger trial, found very similar results, and then he started doing it on other neurological conditions. He did it on tremor and various other things. He even tried it on fibromyalgia. And what they showed was that similar problem applied in fibromyalgia. They suspected that actually the way that cells generate energy, that was being blocked for some kind of a reason. And what they were using B1 to do was not to treat a deficiency. They weren't looking to treat a deficiency. They were looking to overcome this inactivation. And they showed that there was up to an 80% improvement in fatigue and pain scores within a couple of days of using super high doses of B1, which weren't found at lower doses. So I run a group on Facebook. It's called Addressing Thiamine Deficiency and the Paradoxical Reaction. And we've got thousands of people on there. There's a couple of other groups online which focus on using B1. There are thousands of people using super high doses to literally reverse just a bunch of conditions which you wouldn't think would necessarily deficiency related. It's really remarkable to see what B vitamins are capable of when they're used in the correct way, and how few doctors actually even know about this.
So for someone that's fairly resilient, like myself, and not dealing with a super debilitating condition, as far as experimenting with thiamine supplementation, like you mentioned, the 2,000 milligram dose, to kind of see if symptoms go away. Say I want to experiment with that, and I think the highest I've gone with B1 so far is like maybe 500 for the day or something like that. I've mostly focused on the B complex. Are there any negative, side effects? Like, if you drink too much MCT oil, you get diarrhea, or magnesium, you just get loose stools. Is there something like that happens? And say I want to try that 2,000 milligrams experiment. Would I split that up, or could I try that all at once? I know you said you're limited to how much you can absorb. So.
Okay. Yeah. So, right. It's going to depend on the form. So okay. If you're taking Thiamax, let me just preface this, right? So you got different forms. You've got, so you got the cheapest thiamine, which is thiamine hydrochloride or thiamine mononitrate. This is basically thiamine bound with a salt, and it's the cheapest, most widely available. That is limited in how much can be absorbed. And the reason is because you've got these transporters on the gut lining and also on the cell membrane, and they're saturable. So what that means is when a certain amount has gone through, they become like blocked up. You can't really absorb much more. So the concept behind using high doses, so for the thiamine salts, you would need to use much higher amounts compared to a couple of other forms. You have you have forms which were developed or synthesized to overcome this problem, because they saw the utility in getting massive amounts of B1 into people, but they wanted to overcome the issue of having to give like 5 grams or something like that. So what they did was they bound B1, they synthesized different forms. You may have heard of one called benfotiamine. There's also another one called sorbutamine, and then there's what is contained in Thiamax called thiamine tetrahydroferryl disulfide. It's basically thiamine bound with the sulfur mercaptan group. And what that mercaptan group allows it to do is it allows it to basically melt into the bloodstream from the gut. Rather than going through these transport proteins, it can basically just bypass that whole issue. So there's no issue with absorption with that form. Same as benfotiamine, it's almost fully absorbed. Same as sorbutamine. And really, with those forms, you need to take a much lower dose than you would with the thiamine salt. So when I said this, talking about those studies, people taking 2,000 milligrams or so, that is looking at the real cheapest form. So for you, if you're taking TTFD, which is Thiamax, or you're taking benfotiamine or sorbutamine, generally the amount that you're going to need is going to be much less to reach that megadose level. The equivalent to 2 grams of the salt is probably going to be something like 400 to 500 milligrams of the of Thiamax. Okay, so you taking 4 or 5 capsules of Thiamax is probably equivalent. If you did want to do some more experimenting, then of course, be my guest. You might also want to experiment with different forms like benfotiamine. That's also widely available, and the dose is a similar range to Thiamax. But in terms of negative symptoms, yeah, there are going to be some potential side effects. One is going to be insomnia. If people, if they take too much B1, then they can find that they get a little bit restless or agitated, or feel a little bit too much like nervous energy. Likewise, it can cause digestive issues. So as in, it can cause diarrhea and maybe some stomach upset. Generally, that's the extent of it. That's quite as bad as it can get. And because it's a water-soluble B vitamin, or it's got lipid-soluble qualities, it means that really you can't overdose on this stuff. It's extremely difficult to. It would be practically impossible to overdose.
What if you match it with magnesium at the right ratio? Does that tend to negate, especially the insomnia part? Or?
Yeah, it does seem to. Yeah. However, because of, I think the insomnia is sometimes it can be having this effect on other minerals, other nutrients, other B vitamins. It can be depleting or stimulating or whatever. Most of the time, even if those vitamins or those minerals and vitamins supporting cofactors are taken, if someone takes too much, then it can still cause that problem. I think it probably relates to neurotransmission. You see, thiamine has an effect on the brain, and this is where you're kind of straying away from the researchers on deficiency and more looking at the nootropic effects of it. So B vitamins, as your listeners probably already know, but B vitamins, like most supplements, can have effects which are not necessarily addressing deficiencies. So someone can have normal levels and yet still benefit from taking them. This is particularly relevant for things like which are brain specific, like choline, CDB choline. There's, aside from the herbs, some of the other B vitamins also have this kind of like nootropic or this effect on how the brain is working normally from a normal perspective. So what thiamine does is it enhances the output of dopamine, it enhances the output of acetylcholine, and this is in a normal brain. So that means it can be very useful if you're studying for an exam, if you need to focus, if you need to use your brain. Okay. However, if you're trying to get to sleep, on the other hand, it can be a problem if you've got racing thoughts and you're kind of like switched on. And I suspect it's probably due to that, the insomnia. Not everyone gets it. I personally get it if I take too much. But that's how I know. I don't need 800 milligrams per day. I just take a couple 100 milligrams.
Yeah. Maybe taking it at the start of the day too, versus like I haven't taken your Thiamax right before bed, which is probably a good thing, but kind of keep it to like the morning, afternoon kind of time frame too.
Yeah, I think so, because there is there is like a circadian fluctuation with the B vitamins and what they're doing as well, right? So, for instance, if you look at some of the supplements like niacin, particularly NAD, you won't want to necessarily take that at nighttime. You would want to take that first thing upon waking, because that is in line with the natural circadian cycle of NAD. And I think probably the same applies to thiamine. Since you're using thiamine to make ATP for the most part, and you're using it for kind of parasympathetic nervous function, but also cholinergic function in the brain, release of certain neurotransmitters, I would imagine that it's going to be more useful taken in the morning and throughout the earlier day. That said, there are many people who actually report that when they take it in the morning time, they feel great, blah, 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 blah. And then if they develop insomnia that night, one of the kind of counterintuitive things that some people find really helps is to take some thiamine before they go to bed, like immediately before they go to bed. This is more relevant for the people who have signs of deficiency. But what I think is actually doing is that they're topping up their system temporarily. And what's happening is they're getting kind of better nervous system regulation, right? So their fight or flight response calms down. They get better parasympathetic nervous system function. The vagus nerves are working better. But then as it gets towards the evening, as their blood level starts to drop, it's been 6 to 8 hours since they had their last dose, their blood level starts dropping. And it's like, then they need to top it back up to re-regulate things. So someone might say, oh yeah, they had pounding heart. They felt like they were super stressed. Felt like they couldn't calm down their nervous system, and then all of a sudden what they do is they take a bump of thiamine and boom, they notice that everything calms down and they manage to get to sleep again. I've got some people who wake up in the middle of the night, they have thiamine right next to their bed, they take a dose of thiamine and it puts them back to sleep.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, it's timely we're talking about this, because I haven't been consistent with B1. Like, I'll take a day off here or there just to kind of see how I feel. But the last 3 nights have had pretty bad sleep. And I can't say what it is, because I've been changing so much at once, like cutting out refined sugar, cold turkey, bringing my carbs below like 30 grams a day. A lot of changes. So it's hard to tell. But like last night, one thing that helped knock me out was the little, it's almost like a TENS unit, but you clip it to your ears and it sends an electrical current to your brain. I have like 3 or 4 of those machines here, and those always calm down my brain. Like if it just feels on, that will slowly over the course of 30, 40 minutes kind of take it down, which is really nice. But I might experiment with that tonight. We'll see, because melatonin doesn't seem to be doing it. So,
is that just since you've been taking the Thiamax that you've been noticing the sleep change?
I think, yeah, but I haven't been daily with it. Like I've only been taking your non-methylated B complex daily without breaks. But the Thiamax have been kind of pulsing like every other day or every 3 days or something like that. But it's interesting. I'm open to experimenting, so maybe I'll try taking a hit right before bed and see what happens.
Yeah, try it, man. I mean, sometimes it can really help people. I mean, it depends, right? Because if someone's sleep problems, like a good way to conceptualize what B1 does is it helps communicate the messages from the brain to the rest of the body through engaging the parasympathetic nervous system. You've got your sympathetic and your parasympathetic, right? And so your sympathetic, again, in a modern world, or people who have difficulty falling asleep, oftentimes there's this engagement of the sympathetic nervous system when it shouldn't necessarily be engaged. And one of the reasons for that is a faulty counterbalance, and again, if you've looked at vagal nerve stimulation or anything like that, then you'll be familiar with the concept that the vagus nerve is really responsible for initiating the shift, getting into this rest and digest state. Well, what a lot of people tend to overlook is the fact that the vagus nerve uses raw material to communicate its messages. And if you don't have enough raw material to make what the vagus nerve needs to communicate those messages, then it doesn't matter how much breathing or vagal nerve stimulating you do, you're not necessarily going to be able to optimize that system. So it turns out that the vagus nerve is using acetylcholine. Acetylcholine being the primary neurotransmitter of the nerve, right? Now in the brain, it has all kinds of like pro-cognitive effects and pro-memory and learning and blah, 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 blah. And it's one of the first systems to become impaired in Alzheimer's disease or dementia. That's why they give anticholinergic drugs and procholinergic stimulants to Alzheimer's disease to improve their brain function. However, in the vagus nerve or in the parasympathetic nervous system, what it's doing is basically telling organs to calm down in their activity or to stimulate all of the digestive functions. That's one of the things that acetylcholine does in the gut. In the muscles, it basically calms things down. Okay. And to make acetylcholine, you need B1. If you don't have enough B1, one of the first signs is that you start to become low in acetylcholine. Another thing that happens is B1 is necessary for the release of acetylcholine from vagal neurons and for the docking and basically message onto the adjacent neuron, the binding of acetylcholine to the adjacent neuron. Thiamine is involved in every single step along that way. And so one of the reasons why people like to take it is because they find that it can have a calming effect. They find that it can help to provide that raw material for the vagus nerve to actually start working again, so that when they do things like breathing exercises, meditation, yoga, they actually find that they're physiologically more compatible with those activities. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that everyone or even most people would benefit, or everyone or most people are even low, because I don't think they are. But there's a reason why it seems to be, or why it's been referred to as probably the most overlooked deficiency in our modern world, is because people will go many years following a diet where they are consuming refined carbohydrates and refined sugar, and then all of a sudden they start adopting a new diet, and they think that all of a sudden, after doing this diet for a week or 2 weeks or something, that everything's back to normal, that everything's going to start working as it should do. Problem is that, this concept of like long-term insufficient levels, well, just changing your diet is not necessarily enough to fix the fact that you've been low for the last 6 or 7 years. So it's like, it can be very easy to overlook this stuff and not know. And usually what you get in a B complex is not really necessarily enough to notice any of the effects. So yeah, it can be useful to experiment with, that's for sure.
Do you want to do some questions, Elliot? I had listeners send in questions, and you answered a lot of them already, but I picked out some good ones.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Does yellow urine mean you aren't absorbing your B vitamins, or is that just a normal effect?
No, it means you are absorbing your B vitamins. So for instance, if you take it's primarily riboflavin. Riboflavin is orange. If you take a riboflavin capsule, vitamin B2, it looks bright orange. When you consume that through the gut, it's absorbed into the bloodstream, travels on the blood, and is filtered out through the kidneys. So the very fact that you're peeing it out in the urine shows that you are absorbing it into the blood. Now, usually, I think what it means is that you just get rid of what you don't need. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have someone who's highly deficient in riboflavin, you can give them riboflavin and they won't pee out orange. Okay. And their poo isn't orange either. So it shows that they're absorbing it and they're using all of it, or they're using most of it. So, no, it's completely normal. Practically everyone would get that.
Okay, yeah, it's funny. That's the argument that some conventional doctors will use. Let's say, you're just peeing out your vitamins. That's like a common meme. It's so simplistic. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the fact is, you only need about 5 milligrams of riboflavin at any one given time, right? So a supplement is going to contain anywhere from 25 to 50 milligrams per day. But there are arguments for taking that higher dose and peeing out what you don't need, rather than just giving yourself a lower dose and potentially not meeting those bases. So yeah, that's normal.
Awesome. Yeah, one question I thought about asking you was the niacin flush. So I experimented with that years ago. I think the first dose was 720 milligrams, and I had that sunburn look for a good 30, 40 minutes. And I think I would combine it with the sauna. And lately I've been taking niacinamide the last 2 to 3 years, which is another form of B3. So I'm just curious your thoughts on, I guess, niacin versus niacinamide, and then the niacin flush specifically, if that's beneficial.
Yeah, it depends what you're trying to achieve. So for the cardiovascular issues, like if you look at the work of Abram Hoffer and his colleagues, then they would say that the flush is one of the necessary things. Actually, to get the flush is part of the mechanism by which you're exerting some of the beneficial effects on the vascular system in the heart. Really, all it is that it's triggering the release of prostaglandin D2, and what that does is it basically activates vasodilation, and then you get this kind of rush of blood to the skin. It's harmless. I personally enjoy it. Some people hate it. I find it quite fun, especially when you're in the sauna and you kind of feel like your neck's all super hot and your face is all prickly. But to each their own. I think if you're using niacin to address cardiovascular issues like reducing cholesterol, reducing oxidized cholesterol, reducing atherosclerosis, heart failure, I would use the flush version. The exact mechanism why, it's been years since I looked into it. I can't think off the top of my head. But there are theoretical justifications for using flush niacin over niacinamide. That said, if you're just using niacinamide in basically to improve mental health, it can be very useful in bipolar or schizophrenia. If you're using it to improve mental health, or if you're just using it for its kind of its mitochondrial benefits or whatever, or as a general supplement, niacinamide is generally the best tolerated, and that's the one that I would go for. Or maybe one of the newer forms like nicotinamide mononucleotide, NMN. If you're using it specifically, so my answer is short. For cardiovascular issues, I would use flush. Mm-hmm. And there is a reason for it. I just can't think of it off the top of my head.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was reading about histamine recently, because I seem to be going through some histamine reactions, and apparently niacin and niacinamide does it increase the release of histamine, and then there are counter things like quercetin that help. Have you done dives into histamine and that whole rabbit hole?
Yeah. So if you don't mind me asking, when would that be triggered? Would that be after a meal, or would that be another time of day when someone would get it? Because it's kind of context dependent, right?
Yeah. I mean, mine would be, it's been like 2, 3, 4 hours after a meal.
2, 3, 4 hours after a meal. And is there any like identifiable trigger, like an allergen, or is it just out of nowhere, out of the blue?
Out of nowhere. Yeah. It's been like itching. And I'm just wondering it could be, not to turn this into a consultation myself, but I'm wondering if it's like a candida. I mean, because I was drinking Mexican Coca-Cola couple a week, root beer in glass, good Virgil's, whatever. And I was putting white sugar in my goat milk for like a couple of years. So pretty substantial amount of refined white sugar for the last couple of years. So I'm wondering if it's like a yeast die off or something like that's potentially triggering it, since I cut off their food supply. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. So when it comes to histamine, there's a couple things that I would usually be looking at. And again, it can be, I don't want to oversimplify it here. Mm-hmm. I would look at, okay, is it coming from the gut? Is it? Because it might not be. If it's coming from the gut, then why? Is it like a dysbiosis thing? Is it that someone has a dysbiosis? Do they have a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth? So if it's coming from the gut, that's one thing. If it's not coming from the gut, then I'd be looking at things like B6, copper, methylation. Copper, both B6 and copper are necessary for enzymes which inactivate histamine. You've got diamine oxidase. You've got histamine N-methyl transferase, HNMT. That also requires SAMe, which is derived from methylation. So there's a variety of different nutrients which could be involved in breaking down histamine. So the thing is, like, does it happen when someone's fasting? If someone's fasted for 24 hours and they're still getting histamine reactions, I would tend to think that it's less likely coming from the gut and it's more likely related to a nutrient imbalance. But if it's only after someone eats, like 3 or 4 hours after they eat, then it could also be a systemic nutrient imbalance, but it could also be a dysbiotic kind of thing. So
yeah, I don't know if you've heard of Candibactin. It's like a Metagenics product. It's
it's excellent.
Yeah. So I've been doing heavy rounds of that for like a month. So that could have been part of it. Cause it's like, for those that aren't aware, it's oregano oil, thyme oil, basically this really concentrated plant essential oils, but with like, is it berberine? So basically taking these gel caps, the liquid, and then these tablets. This is like a cleanse. It's not something to do long-term, right? But that could have stirred something up in my gut potentially, because that's kind of like a nuclear bomb, right? I mean, I've done rounds of high-dose wild oregano oil, and that stuff's strong.
Yeah, the Candibactin AR and BR, that's the whole protocol, right? And that's actually one of the ones that they studied. They did a clinical study for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth like years ago. It was about 10 years ago. Everyone went crazy for that stuff. I personally, that's my favorite kind of gut antimicrobial protocol. I find it works wonderful. It is like a nuclear bomb though. You know, I mean, it could be killing off some strains which help you naturally metabolize histamine for whatever reason. So, if it's only been happening since you've been doing that, then I would imagine it's probably causing some kind of an imbalance in the gut. Maybe some kind of histamine degrading bugs, like a probiotic, could come in handy in that respect.
Yeah, I'll experiment. Hopefully it's something as simple as that. I've been liking the Vis Biome, the powdered refrigerated packets. They make one that's like 950 billion or count organisms. It's pretty strong. I think they've used that for SIBO and different for certain conditions, but let's see. This is a good question. How to know whether to take methylated forms of the B vitamins without a DNA test?
See how you feel. It's as simple as that. I mean, here's the thing, right? So most people, if someone's in relatively good health, most people can tolerate either methylated or non-methylated, like most of them. And I think the difference is somewhat overstated as well, because if you, like, for instance, you said that you were taking our non-methylated vitamin. In a non-methylated B vitamin, you're still getting the B12. It's just, right. So I'll give you an example. In our non-methyl B complex, we have hydroxycobalamin and we have folinic acid. That's not folic acid, it's folinic acid, otherwise known as calcium folinate. Now, when those get into the body can convert whatever it needs into methyl and into non-methyl form. And it can interchangeably convert them back and forth, right? Likewise, there's also good reason to believe that if you take something like methyl B12, the methyl group from the B12 has to be detached anyway before you can even get it into the cell. So it's not like by taking methyl B12, you're getting methyl B12 in the cells. The body doesn't really work like that. It's like there's lots of different, probably a billion different reactions before it even gets into the cell. Like, I don't think anyone truly understands this. What I would say is that 99% of the time, someone can just take the supplement and see how they feel. If they feel okay, then they're good with that. Now, you could say, and you could look at all of the genetic SNPs and say, oh, yeah, well, you've got you're homozygous for this and heterozygous for this and homozygous for this. But a lot of the time, I think that's just intellectual hocus pocus, because looking at someone's genes doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the gene expression. It doesn't necessarily tell you like how active they are, whether that is playing any functional role in how well your body is working. You know, you've got multiple copies of like all of these different kinds of genes. So you could have MTHFR, but there's like 12 different variants of MTHFR. It's like, which one is even like playing a role? So I would say just listen to your body, man.
Mm-hmm. I like it. Yeah, we had a lot of questions on like what's the best form, and you already went through that. And I liked one recent video you made on the different forms of B vitamins, and you basically said there's no best form. Because I used to get that about magnesium, and people still think magnesium bicarbonate is the best form because certain people have said that, and I used to say it or whatever. But different people react to different forms of supplements, right? Whether it's vitamins or minerals or whatever.
Yeah.
So it really is about the experimentation. Because someone asked on the same note, is B6 or B9 toxic to supplement? I know if I take the inactive form of B6, I get super itchy. Was it pyridoxine HCl?
Yeah.
I think it is. But P5P, I'm fine. I don't get any itching. So I know that happens for me. So does that make it, quote, toxic? Well, that one form of B6, right? I think there's this meme going around that high, B6, even low dose causes neuropathy. I'm sure you've heard that. Or
Yeah. People like to oversimplify things. I try to stay as clear as possible away from these kinds of oversimplifications to say that any one particular type of supplement is toxic. Because I think if there was any one particular type of supplement that was toxic, I don't think that anyone would take it. I don't think that it would have gotten to the point where it had been researched and even made its way into a supplement. I think it's easy to apply, to take your own experience and apply that to everyone, make generalizations, and then educate other people about that as if it's like a truth. I think the chances is that most of these things can be somewhat toxic under certain circumstances. And I don't doubt at all that there are some people who have reactions to pyridoxine. But there are also a subset of people who do better with pyridoxine than P5P, and I've seen that personally. So no matter how well you can justify something intellectually, it would seem as though the context always wins, and I think that's the key here. I'm not convinced that there's any one particular supplement which is toxic. I think you always have to assess things on a case-by-case basis, always. And that even with iron. I think you even discussed that as well. It's like, right. For someone like me who has basically like hereditary hemochromatosis, then iron is toxic. But for young Jennifer down there who's on her period, who's 14 years old, who doesn't eat meat and who's iron deficient anemic, iron is like excellent for her. It's like context, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've been fascinated with like A, D, E, and K, the fat soluble vitamins, because they kind of protect from excess with each other. Like a lot of people are familiar with D and K2 and that balance, that K2 protects against vitamin D toxicity or the symptoms of that. But vitamin E protects against retinol toxicity or vitamin A toxicity. So yeah, same thing with the B vitamins. I'm sure if you just megadose loads of B6 and you're not taking any of the other ones, yeah, you could call that toxic, right? But like you said, context.
Yeah. What I would say is that there are things that go on at the cellular level. What it seems to be the case is that people who have a problem with B6 toxicity is that pyridoxine can inhibit the enzyme which activates B6. And so it is the accumulation of inactive B6, which contributes towards toxicity symptoms, which are actually deficiency symptoms. So B6 toxicity is B6 deficiency. It seems to be B6 deficiency at its lowest level because it is the inactive form, which is actually not doing anything, the inactive form which prevents the activation. And so it's like you've got this real problem here. It's kind of what they say about copper. Is that you have high free copper, but you're not actually utilizing it. And when it's free, then that is when you look at all of the evidence to show that it rapidly causes, oxidative stress, and it causes damage to cells. Like you expose mitochondria to too much copper, and it's like, whew, game over. It's like iron. So everything's context dependent. And I think that everything needs to be assessed in that way. Try not to, yeah.
That's great. That's great. is it true that supplementing with B1 or B vitamins has a hangover reducing effect? Or I guess, if someone were to drink, what are the top nutrients you would take before and after?
Yeah, definitely the B vitamins, because alcohol depletes B1, that's for sure. Because it has a depleting effect on the other Bs. But because one of the things that is contributing to a lot of the negative effects of having a hangover, of course, you've got the dehydration aspect of it, which drinking fluid is going to be the only way that you're going to manage that. But it is really because alcohol takes center stage in the liver, so it can impair the detoxification of other things that you would ordinarily be getting rid of, right? So it's like, as long as your liver is busy getting rid of alcohol, then it's almost like your resources become reduced and you can't process a lot of other stuff. So then you're dealing not only with the toxic breakdown products of alcohol, acetaldehyde, etc., but you're also dealing with a backlog of other shit that your liver has to then process. And so the Bs are particularly useful for all of the phase 1 liver detoxification reactions. But I would also say you'd want to be taking some amino acids with that, some glycine, some N-acetylcysteine, and maybe even some liposomal glutathione. I would go so far as to say that. So like on New Year's Eve, you can bet I laid down on the liposomal glutathione. I killed that stuff before New Year's Eve, because I'm not going through I'm not drinking, like
it's interesting. Like I think so Ben Greenfield lives close to me. I've been to his house multiple times, and he made a post recently, biohacker guy, about dry farm wines, like the low sugar lab tested wines. And 90% of the reaction was negative. It was like, how can you promote this poison? You're snake oil, you're promoting alcohol, you're a horrible person, blah, blah, blah. And again, back to context, it's like those people probably have had alcoholic parents or partners in their life. And so they have this, philosophy around alcohol that nobody should ever drink it ever on earth, but that's just their experience with it, versus in a balanced way, one glass of wine here or there with your loved one over, salmon dinner or something. It's a beautiful thing. And it's beneficial. I recently found the whole acetaldehyde supplement market. Like, there's a probiotic now you could drink that prevents the breakdown of that. And there's some compound, I think Michaela Peterson started selling, that prevents that breakdown.
Is that like DMP?
Yeah.
DMP something. Yeah. I'd actually not come across that until I saw she was selling it. Yeah.
Yeah. Fun
I
stuff.
don't blame her if it works.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, that's the thing, right? It's like people who say alcohol is poison. I really try to stay away from people who promote a black and white view of the world, because time and time again, I gradually learned that there is very few absolutes. Even with nutrition, with health, and even things that you would think are objectively bad for everyone don't seem to be that way. So I think if you're someone who has relatively good metabolic flexibility, you're quite robust in terms of your health, then I don't think alcohol is problematic if it's taken in moderation, if it's not abused. And it's something that we've done for how many thousands of years. I generally think that those things are probably not as bad as they are painted out to be.
Right. Yeah. Lipofuscin is such a hard topic to research because there's not books on it that I've found. There's not a lot of information. But the research on ethanol consumption for reducing lipofuscin is fascinating. And then if you go over a threshold, it increases its accumulation. So I don't know if it's a couple teaspoons or tablespoons, but I would imagine it's contextual based on your vitamin E status and glutathione, various other things. But
that's interesting. Where did you come across that? Does Pete talk about that?
I think he might have been the one. I'm pretty sure. If you just search ethanol consumption lipofuscin, there's a great PubMed study on it. But yeah, it's hard to kind of pin down the dosage there. And I would imagine it varies individual to individual. what effect you get. Because so far I've only found like DMAE. They're trying to develop pharmaceuticals to remove lipofuscin. It's one of those things that impairs autophagy. So I think it's kind of central to aging.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes you wonder. There's research on alcoholic drinks and longevity, and there are people who say, "Oh, this research is bunk. It's nonsense. One glass of wine doesn't protect you against this and that." It makes you wonder, does it? Actually does it? Does it? I don't like, the thing is, I don't know enough about this, and there's just so many different people with different ideas, and you don't know which research is right and which is wrong. There's one study showing one thing, another showing another thing. It's a minefield, really, isn't it? It really is a minefield.
It is. I just got David Sinclair's book, the Harvard guy, and he's the resveratrol guy, and the
NMN guy as well.
NMN, right? And I think he said in an interview he gets a significant amount of his calories from alcohol, which I thought was hilarious.
Well, he takes a gram of NMN every day as well, right?
Right.
That's what I've been doing that for the past 6 months or so.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have NR, NMN. I've tried so many different. I tried the NAD tablets years ago, which were really expensive. For a while, I was of the mentality that just niacinamide alone is enough to boost NAD levels, but it's probably contextual, right? Like different people would do better on NMN or nicotinamide riboside or niacin or niacinamide. You really have to. I don't know how you could track that. Can you measure NAD levels? Is there a test?
Well, there's a couple of like offhand measurements to check. So you can check like your what is it? There's a company called HDRI, and that is looking at your I think it does your red blood cell NAD to NADH ratio. I don't know how accurate it is, and I don't know how well it corresponds to like systemic levels. I think it's probably also an organ specific thing or a tissue specific thing, but there's labs who do it. I don't know how accurate they are. I've never done it myself, never tested.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm most excited about for the future is being able to do more advanced testing to I don't know if what that's going to look like, but to be able to look deeper into the body to measure status of different things. I mean, there's been so many biohacking devices over the years. Like I think a Kickstarter campaign was selling a little pen that you hooked up to an app, and you press it on the two different parts of your fingernail on all your nails and your fingers, and it would supposedly tell you what vitamin and mineral deficiencies you had, or if you had too much or too little, based on like acupressure meridian points. But yeah, it did. Right. It seemed more fun than anything. I don't think it was very accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I'll believe it when I see it. Right, I'll believe it when I see it. With that kind of stuff, I'm open to that kind of stuff. If they can do that, then that's great. But then again, there was that case. There was that case of that. Were you familiar with that? She was like a corporate psycho. Can't remember her name. Blonde hair. A couple of years ago in the US, she had billions of dollars of investors, and they were high-level investors as well. She had claimed to be able to perform, 300 blood tests just from taking a finger prick sample. So she'd got like billions of dollars invested in this biotech corporation, and they claimed to be able to have this test available to the general public within like 2 years. And this was going to like revolutionize health testing, because rather than having to take multiple vials, you would have been able to do everything just from like one finger prick. Anyway, it turned out that she was a complete fraud, and now she's actually in prison because none of it was true. So there's lots of people who claim to be able to do this, but I'm cautious.
Interesting. Yeah. Quick aside to that. I was recently at a conference, a health conference, and I don't know if you've heard of the Copper 2 guy, Charlie. He was the Mitosynergy brand?
Yeah, I know of the product. I don't know of the guy.
Okay. So I met him in person and he knew who I was. And he sat me down and he invited me up to the hotel room to look at my blood and a live blood microscope. And he claimed that copper 1, like copper bisglycinate and copper gluconate, all the normal supplemental forms were toxic. Even though ascorbic acid will reduce or will change copper 1 to copper 2, his idea was only this copper 2 form is what's found in nature, and all the other forms are like eating dirt or supplementing dirt. But he passed away like a couple months after that conference. It was really interesting because apparently that form of copper is beneficial for cancers and certain supposedly non-curable conditions. So part of me wonders if they if they took him out because he was gaining some traction, but because he did have some clinical studies behind that copper 2 product. I can't remember the exact name of it was copper 2 found in niacin. So it was a copper niacin form.
Right.
But it was super expensive. I mean, it was like $1 a capsule.
Wow.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, I know some people who took that. But I never came across his work. Is it still manufactured?
I think his brother took over. And now there's like 2 or 3 companies now selling it. It's like if you like copper niacin, if you search that, probably.
I've come across that as well. I've never delved too much into that area of things. I just find that there's so much else. I try to listen to people who also, who do their dive into it. I try to get a rough understanding, but you can't learn as much as you need to learn about every single one of these topics, right? It's just impossible. And there's so many nuances and so much more information coming out all of the time. So it's just like, there's only so much time in the day. Yeah. But that's interesting. I'll check that out.
Right. That's my current issue. Someone said, and this is more of a comment, I've heard a large percentage of patients in psych wards have significant B1 deficiency.
Yeah, it's true.
Wow.
Yes, psych wards, ICU. In fact, in the ICU, the emergency room, in the intensive care unit, sorry. Approximately, what is it? What's the level? Was it like approximately 70% are deficient? No. Approximately 20 to 30%, if I remember correctly, 20 to 30% are mildly deficient when they get in there, but then within 10 days, up to 70% of them are deficient. So that's either because of the junk that they feed them, because they do feed them bad food, or it could be the IV nutrition that they give, which is pretty bad. Or alternatively, it could also relate to the fact that they're in an intensive care unit, their body is rapidly using up nutrition to try to deal with some kind of a problem that they're dealing with. So they're just not getting enough. So yeah, it's true among any kind of care unit, whether it be conventionally medical or elderly or psychiatric, B1 deficiency is super common among that population.
Wow. Have you heard of a connection with epilepsy and seizures with B1?
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. Of course. In fact, there's one of the main things that they use it for is reducing seizure frequency. In fact, I have a woman who just commented to me. She sent me an email a couple of weeks ago too, to say that she thought she was going to die. She was having seizures so bad that she was afraid that she was actually going to hit her head. She felt like she was going to die basically, and she'd almost given up. She tried 500 milligrams of B1 and she hadn't seen any improvement. I think she was on a ketogenic diet. She tried lots of different things and nothing had worked. But so she came across somewhere I'd written or a video that I'd done, and she decided to take a leap of faith. She took 1,800 milligrams. And within like 3 days, her seizures stopped and all of her symptoms improved. And she's been like that for months now. I'm thinking about getting her actually for an interview on my channel just to explain the situation.
That'd be great. Wow.
There's a lot of evidence, a lot of research using B1 for epilepsy and seizures. What I would say is that in some conditions, if the seizures are cholinergic, meaning that if there's too much, there's a heightened release of acetylcholine in the brain, which is triggering the seizure, then thiamine can make it worse because thiamine enhances acetylcholine in the brain. But most seizures aren't that. Most seizures are unrelated. And so thiamine can actually put the brakes on that, because what it does is it helps to clear up glutamate. Glutamate is the main excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. And seizures, oftentimes, they relate to this problem of glutamate excitotoxicity. Glutamate is involved in neuron firing, and you get just rapid neuron firing. Well, one of the consequences of B1 deficiency, or one of the pharmacological effects of using thiamine, is that it can help the brain to clean up excess glutamate. And so, if you look at animal research, what they'll do is they expose animals to seizure-provoking activity, things which would usually trigger seizures, and then they give them thiamine beforehand, and then they compare the animals. They show that the thiamine-treated animals didn't get seizures. Or, for instance, if they exposed animals to traumatic brain injury, if they give them massive amounts of thiamine before traumatic brain injury, then the animals don't get the elevated glutamate and the brain damage that they would get without the thiamine from getting bashed on the head. So yeah, there's a lot of super interesting like neurochemical effects of B1. Yeah.
Wow. Is there a way to tell whether seizures are cholinergic or not?
I've been asked that a couple of times. What I usually say to people is, can you check with your neurologist? Usually the diagnosis from the neurologist should give a rough idea, and I think they probably can tell based on the response to different drugs that are used and things like that. And there probably is a way with some kind of a scan. I don't know enough about neurology or brain anatomy to be able to tell. I don't know. That's
fascinating. Cleaning up glutamate. Does that build up under like sleep deprivation, or if you don't get a good night's sleep? Because I know you kind of go through like the glymphatic like brainwashing when you sleep. Have you used B1 for being underslept, or do you think it has application there?
I think it probably has application. Yeah. I actually just almost finished a chapter I'm writing on fibromyalgia, and that talks about the glymphatic system. Basically, what was the question? Can B1 be used in problems with the glymphatic system or in sleep deprivation?
Yeah, or just for as a tool in your first aid cabinet if you don't get a full night's sleep, but you still need to have energy to get through your day. And
I think it can. Now, generally, what's going to build up to when someone's sleep deprived is adenosine, right? That's one of the things which enhances the sleep drive. I don't think that there's any relationship between adenosine and thiamine. What I can say though is that, glutamate is generally, when you look at any condition of the brain where the brain is placed under high demands, and say under sleep deprivation, say if there's cognitive impairment, say if there is ADHD or anxiety disorder or any kind of neuroinflammatory condition, any kind of condition of the brain with oxidative stress, there's usually something related to an imbalance between glutamate and GABA. Your listeners probably know about this, but GABA being basically the inhibitory system in the brain, glutamate being the excitatory system. And you can get, it can go either one way or the other. It's actually not good to have too much GABA and not enough glutamate. In fact, that's been associated with schizophrenia, a lack of glutamate in certain regions. But overall, what I would say is that there's a tendency of glutamate to be, let's say, the bad actor in the situation, because most conditions where there's brain damage, it features too much glutamate. And so glutamate is something which generally many people would benefit from lowering. And some of the reasons for this, I mean, I think it probably is quite important in a modern world. If you look at EMF, for instance, well, that that it increases the release of glutamate. And that's one of the ways in which it damages the brain is enhancing the release of glutamate. So thiamine, because thiamine is a cofactor for an enzyme called glutamate dehydrogenase, and it's also that's not true. It's an enzyme. It's a cofactor for an enzyme called alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. And this enzyme is responsible for basically allowing glutamate to enter into the Krebs cycle. So the Krebs cycle being one of the ways by which cells make energy. Okay. And glutamate being an amino acid is anaplerotic. It means that it can enter in and it can be used and broken down further to make ATP. So one of the ways in which cells protect against too much glutamate is by sucking it into the TCA cycle. And they do that because it enters in alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. But if you don't have enough B1, then you can't take up glutamate and use it in that way. And so it ends up sticking around for too long. Okay. B1 can also enhance the rate at which glutamate is broken down or is converted into GABA. So there's lots of things that your brain can do with glutamate if it's in too high concentrations. But thiamine appears to be one of the main tools by which it can process glutamate alternatively. So yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, other B vitamins as well, B6 super important for glutamate balance, for production of GABA. Taurine, again, it's not just B1, I think there's lots of nutrients across the board, but again, B1 is my primary interest. That's why I've spoken about it. So
yeah, this was awesome, Elliot. This was really fun. And do you think you'll ever release like a B2 isolated supplement? Because I've heard that one helps with a lot of different things, like anxiety or various things.
Yeah. You know about Gregory Russell Jones?
No.
Have you ever heard of the concept of functional B2 deficiency?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay. So now that is something that is super, super interesting. That's another rabbit hole that I'm going to go down one day.
What was the guy's name? So I could look.
He's a biochemist. His name's Gregory Russell Jones. Now, he has a website, I think it's called b12info.com. He has done a lot of research into B12. I think that's what he specialized in, his PhD was in. But that led him to look at some of the factors which can actually cause B12 deficiency. Aside from there being a dietary problem, it turns out that, I'll be very short with this because I know we're definitely over on time here. In simple terms, sometimes a B12 deficiency can only be fixed by addressing the root cause, which is not a B12 deficiency, which is an inability to recycle B12 because of a B2 deficiency. Because you need B2 in its active form to recycle B12, to use B12. Wow. So because of that, taking B2 is also not necessarily the way that you would address that, because you need to be able to recycle B2 as well. So you use molybdenum, selenium, and iodine. I'll send you some info because I think you might be interested in that. He's got a group and stuff on Facebook. He's got work that he's published online. Maybe I will. Maybe not. I don't know enough about it, and I don't know if it could be as useful as B1. I have no idea. Maybe I will. I don't know. Yeah, if enough people ask for it, then we will.
A whole nother rabbit hole, right?
Yeah.
Well, I love your Thiassist supplement. I thought that was a cool blend. It's magnesium, potassium, molybdenum, selenium, and manganese. Molybdenum, selenium, and manganese are kind of overlooked minerals. Like, I've been playing with pretty high dose manganese based on what my HTMA practitioner recommended based on my results, that I had a manganese deficiency. So I could have been on like 30-ish milligrams a day.
Wow, that's high, man.
Right.
How long for?
I think it's going on like 3 months, something like that. 2 or 3. I mean, it's with other minerals, so it's like with zinc and small dose of copper because it's a significant amount of zinc. I think I'm on like 60 or 70 milligrams of zinc a day, something like that. So it's this idea of mineral balancing, which I don't know if I'm fully on board because you have to stop all isolated supplements, which is a little extreme, especially just committing to like one brand. So, but anyway, whole nother thing. But molybdenum's another interesting one. And so, objectivenutrients.com, is that your US source if people are in the United States to purchase?
All of them. The thing is, if depending on where you are, it takes you to the different type of website. So if in the US, you get taken to the US website. If you're in the EU, you get taken to Europe, and if you're in the UK, you get taken to UK. We distribute from all of those places as well. So all US customers will get it from New Jersey or New Jersey. That's where it's distributed from. Basically the supplement that you referred to, all of our supplements are based on the basic principle of using thiamine medicinally or using thiamine from a therapeutic standpoint. And all of the supplements that we have are designed to complement or work towards that aim in some way. So the minerals was based on a lot of the research that I'd done for when you take B1 in high doses, it throws off other nutrients. Selenium, molybdenum can help you process the sulfur in the B1, etc. We've got a lot of that information online. Again, the B complex is similar, and then we also have megathia, which is like 4 types of B1 in super high dose, and that is again because some people like to take different forms and benefit from different forms. Made the company to provide these forms of B1 in a place that doesn't have any like fillers or additives or anything like that, because some people don't like to use that stuff. With the concept of using B1 in high doses, that's what we do.
I love it. Yeah, when I got into B vitamin therapy, there's like Solgar and these like lower grade companies where there are excipients and it's not the right form. So I was really happy to be introduced to yours. And Thiamega, the one you mentioned with 4 different forms of B1, that's the one I started with. And then I recently tried Thiamax. What would be the reason of going with Thiamax over Thiamega? If you just do better with that one form, or?
Yeah, if you do better with that one form, or alternatively, if you do better with higher amounts of that one form. So that's the form, that's TTFD. That's what they favor in Japan. So if you went over to Japan and you got prescribed B1, you'd mostly be prescribed Thiamax, or the type of B1 that's in Thiamax. And that is particularly good for for central nervous system problems. So getting directly into the brain, or for it's also particularly good at fixing gut issues as well. So motility problems or things like that. Whereas the other one, if someone's got peripheral neuropathy, they might want to take something with benfotiamine in, because that seems to work well. Or if they have memory issues, they might want to take something with sulbutamine in. That works well for that. Or likewise, some people, 400 milligrams is just too high. Like it's just way too high for them. They need a much lower dose. They need like 100 milligrams. Whereas other people, they benefit from doing high doses. So it's ultimately really individual.
I'm doing fine with it.
Yeah. No, that's a good sign, man. That's a good sign. And usually it's time dependent as well. You know, it's like they have to start low. So there's no point getting Thiamega, because they'd have to open up the capsule and take like an eighth of it. Whereas if they use a Thiamax, they can open up the capsule and just take like a half of that, rather than do a full one to start off with. If they're super sensitive, that is, which a lot of people are. Got it.
Okay. Yeah. So eonutrition.co.uk is Elliot's website, and do consultations, right?
Not at the moment. No.
Okay.
No. I was, but I'm not. I'm actually writing a book at the moment, which is taking a lot longer than expected. Awesome. And I'm focusing on some other stuff. I'm trying to make some more content. Find me more recently on YouTube. And I've doing a couple of different projects, but no, I'm not. I don't see anyone at the moment. I have like So a lot of people get in contact and they want to have a consultation about thiamine deficiency or something like that, or how to address it. For those people, I generally refer them to a document that I made. So I have like a clinical guide on what to do and when to do it, how to do it, etc. And that's something that I offer to people if they want to do a consultation. I say, look, if this is why you come to me, just go to this document and most of your questions will be answered. And that's available on the website as well. It's called thiamineprotocols.com. And then yeah, that's just about everything, I think.
I love it. Well, yeah, you're a testament to the benefits of B vitamins, because you're really pumping out content. I'm always impressed with your YouTube videos. You're like a juggernaut just with the massive amount of content that you're sharing, and it's useful. It's useful stuff is the great part. You're not just reciting studies. It's like practical information, which is really cool. So,
well, it's a more recent thing, right? But yeah, no, I enjoy it. That's the thing, though. Some people, like, I've seen you on Instagram, and you're pretty prolific on Instagram. I don't know how to use Instagram, man. Like,
that's good. Don't get on
it. You go on my profile. I got like 6 posts or something like that. I never know what to write. Same as Twitter. I don't really know. I feel a bit awkward on Twitter. I've got 5,000 followers or something, but I mean, I don't really know what to say and how to say it. So
yeah, I think I
enjoy your stuff on Instagram as well. You know.
Oh, appreciate it. Yeah, lately I've been enjoying the breaks, because I feel like that's when like the integration, of information and new stuff. It's just kind of taking a break from all of it. And I'm fortunate to be out in a natural environment, so it's the perfect spot to do that. But just to kind of get away from it all and kind of connect the dots, because with all the stuff I'm constantly looking into, it can get kind of disorientating a little bit, or just get lost, where connecting too many dots, I'm like, okay, back up, see the bigger picture again, and then get back to it. But anyway, this was awesome. And yeah, check out Elliot's stuff. Do they just search, what do they search on YouTube to find you?
They could either put EO Nutrition, so EO Nutrition, or just my name, Elliot Overton. Perfect. If you do that, then you usually find like it auto types like Elliot Overton oxalates or Elliot Overton thiamine, EO Nutrition thiamine. You just click on one of those and then you'll be taken to EO Nutrition. I've got a couple of different playlists on the different videos and stuff. As you'll see, like I've got a bunch of videos on B1. That's not, the idea is to actually make more content on other things, because I do know about other B vitamins and things, but I just, my passion is B1. What can I say? It's just one of those things.
I love it. Well, I hope you interview like Gregory Russell Jones or something, or have something on B2. That'd be really interesting.
Yeah, that's my next topic. That's my next topic. I think I'll do that. Well, I'll work on it. I'll see what he says.
I love it. Yeah. All right, Elliot. Well, hang on the show as I close it out. Thanks so much.
Okay. Yeah, cool, man. Thanks.
As I said in the show, Elliot is a testimony to the power of thiamine and B vitamins in general, with his ability to articulate and effortlessly recall all of these very difficult concepts about human health. I would not consider myself a specialist that deep dives into one or two subjects. I like to dabble in everything and connect as many dots as I can across multiple different areas. But we really need people like Elliot hyper focusing on these specifics. For example, this vitamin B1 called thiamine that is really overlooked. I never hear that talked about in the nootropic biohacking circles, in the carnivore circles, intermittent fasting communities. They talk about all of these other things, importance of potassium and sodium and magnesium. And those are all important. But as Elliot mentioned, vitamin B1 is the energy gatekeeper. Without it, you can have all the magnesium in the world, all of the CoQ10 or ubiquinol supplements or PQQ, and you're not going to increase energy production without thiamine. It's really refreshing for me to hear someone of Elliot's intellect defend isolated supplementation. I always find it really odd when I hear these different health camps say you don't need supplements to heal. I think a lot of the people involved in these movements have had negative experiences by supplementing incorrectly, either in the wrong dosages, not enough, or too much, or not balancing it out with the other nutrients. For example, obviously we know K2 with vitamin D, but less known, vitamin E protects against vitamin A, quote unquote, toxicity. And it goes on, where you can take way too much zinc, but if you take a little bit of copper, say copper bisglycinate, with your, say, 100 milligrams of zinc, just a random example, then you'll have a better experience than not taking any copper at all. And so B1 and magnesium. And there's these less well-known relationships. And I think these people that haven't had positive experiences with nutritional supplements were doing it wrong. They were unaware of how to balance out these nutrients. I would say there are certain exceptions, like enzyme therapy, whether it be digestive or systemic enzymes. You don't have to balance those out. In fact, I've had transcendental experiences using enzyme therapy while intermittent fasting. But for most cases, when it comes to vitamins and minerals especially, you must know the cofactors. And usually you have to take one or two other things to balance out an isolated supplement that you're taking. In the end, the results speak with supplements. I've experienced it in my own life, which is what led me to create Mitolife. And likewise, Elliot with EO Nutrition and his US branch, Objective Nutrients. It's really incredible to introduce supplements to my friends, family members, even neighbors, and hear these miraculous testimonials. This supplement changed my life. And of course, the missing links are not going to be uniform across the board for every single individual. The supplements that are required to get back into balance vary. Like I mentioned to Elliot, and he was vegetarian for many years of his life. I was vegan for many years of my life, or mostly plant-based. And that definitely affected my iron status, copper, zinc, manganese. I wasn't getting essential fats or amino acids for most of my life, most likely, creating stunted growth in my brain and all throughout my body. But I do believe in the power of the body to regenerate. And if you stay consistent with a foundation of the highest quality food that you can find, plus proper supplementation, good sleep, good light environment. I've been really liking the Philips Hue bulbs. My friend Jonathan got me into those, and I'm actually using those to influence my circadian rhythm because they're based off clinical studies with their natural light setting. So I've really been enjoying those bulbs with low flicker. Of course, nurturing and cultivating good relationships with loved ones, keeping a really close circle of people that you can trust and depend on and confide in. These are all really crucial pieces to human health. But I would put nutritional supplements, specifically isolated supplements, up there in importance with all of those things. So if you want to dive more into Elliot's work, you can go to eonutrition.co.uk. I'll put the link in the show notes. And if you're in the US and you'd like to order his products, you can go to objectivenutrients.com. If you want to check out my work, you can go to matt-blackburn.com. I have my CLF protocol. I'm working on getting all the podcasts transcribed. So there's quite a few up there if you prefer to read text versus audio. You can click the podcast tab. If you go to shop, you can see all of my recommended products. And my brand is Mitolife. You can find that at mitolife.co. We have a lot of exciting things coming in the next couple months for you guys. Really, March, April, going to be a really exciting time with the drinking water filter finally being released. That's been about 2 years in the making. I have 2 or 3 new supplements in the works that I'm going to keep secret until it gets closer to launch. And the elk velvet antler should be back in stock within the next few weeks. I'm also going to be ramping up the information about all of the various Mitolife supplements and the scientific backing that they have. Specifically bamboo silica extract, which I'm switching to with a lot of the Mitolife supplements. I've noticed personally that my hair and nails have been growing at a rapid rate, probably 3 to 4 to 5 times as fast as they normally grow. So I have to trim my nails more. I have to go get a haircut more often. And to me, that's annoying. I know a lot of people, especially women, like that effect. I know that growing hair is one way that we get heavy metals out of our scalp and out of our brain. So I know that with accelerated hair growth, I'm actually getting accelerated heavy metal removal. So lots more to come about all of that. I will see you guys on next Friday's show, and stay supercharged.